So as an anthropology major, I'm really interested in culture, and along with that comes some gender identities and gender discrimination and everything involved with that. So I'm here to talk to you today about vagina. Vagina, 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 vagina. Okay, so it's really uncomfortable for me, it's uncomfortable for you, but that's one of our issues with the fact that it is so taboo of something that we don't really talk about very often. At least, I mean, back in the day, it was something we never ever talked about. So when you think of the vagina, you think of this diagram. This is what we see in elementary school. I first saw it in 5th grade, talking about puberty and reproduction, and it shows all the different parts of the female reproductive system. But when it shows the vagina, you see like a little, it's like a hole, like what is that? Like there's nothing there, like there's an empty space. What is the vagina? Nobody knows. I mean, we do know, but we aren't educated on it. So a lot of feminists have a serious problem with this. They say, why aren't we seeing this? Why aren't we looking at all the different organs of the actual vagina as opposed to what's for procreation? So sex versus procreation versus sex for pleasure is something that has created a double standard in the sexual lives of women and men. Men have two sex organs, the penis and the testes, which we know are also used for pleasure. But for females, having an orgasm is a luxury, not a necessity for procreation. So back in the 1950s, the way life was, you had this whole Stepford wife, housewife, cooking and cleaning, and it was happy, and the women, they were so happy and simple, and that's how life was. But that's only how it was perceived by society. Women did not get to be sexually free because they weren't experiencing true sexual pleasure because A, they didn't have the knowledge base of what their actual body parts and functions could do, and B, the people that did know were the doctors who were the men. And as I'll talk about later, men repress this for a multitude of civilizational as well as sociocultural reasons. So once women started talking, this happened. 10 years later, we go from the Stepford housewife to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but obviously the sexual revolution that happened was like immaculately different and rebellious to the old culture. Basically, before this happened, the knowledge basis that we have was from Freud. And Freud was, first of all, to say the least, was extremely, extremely sexist. So a lot of what he said, he was obsessed with psychosexual stages, and he discussed how everything was related to sex, and everything we thought and did was related to our biological urges and drives to have sex. So what he told us was that as a woman, if you didn't enjoy vaginal sex and you only needed the clitoral stimulation, you were in the phallic stage and you were frigid and you were like a child because you couldn't enjoy sex the way it was supposed to be. So women felt horrible about themselves. They freaked out. They went to psychologists. They're like, what's wrong with me? Like, I can't enjoy sex and whatever. And this caused women a lot of problems. So in the 1950s, these three awesome people came out with these reports that actually finally showed women, and women could talk about their body and how their body worked and how the female orgasm worked, things that were never talked about before. Even though there was knowledge existing on female orgasm since the 1600s, it was repressed a lot by males in societies. For the main reason was that the actual pleasure center of a female's vagina is the clitoris. And for a male to have sex with a woman, he doesn't need to stimulate the clitoris. He just needs to do his thing and it's done and that's it for him. But for women, they don't get to experience anything, and men don't want women to know that because then they have to do some work and they have to do stuff other than what's for themselves. And that became an issue. So William Masters and Virginia Johnson, as well as Alfred Kinsley, came up with reports that A, women don't need a penis to have an orgasm. Many women are capable of any kind of a multitude of kinds of orgasms, aside from just vaginal and clitoral, and that women were actually technically insatiable, that they can have extremely powerful and multiple orgasms, more so than the male just having one. So obviously this is just a diagram also of the differences between the female and male orgasms as I was discussing. So this outraged men at the time. Men were like, oh my God, she doesn't need me, what am I going to do? So this brings me back to the whole gender identity, this double standard issue. So what I found really interesting in my research was that there are some anthropologists who have studied ancient civilizations who believe that because of the fact that women are insatiable. This is actually a quote. They say, the more a woman does, the more she can, and the more she can, the more she wants to. And this is just describing how for women to be dominated in a society, and anthropologists have studied this, if a woman is dominant, they actually believe that because they will be driven by their natural sex drives, and the more they have orgasms, the more they have sex, the more they know, they're just going to go on sexual rampages and that the world won't be organized. And this is actually a feminist. Her name is Mary Jane Sherfy, who actually believes this. And she says that there's about a 4,000 to 7,000 year gap between two major events in our civilization, in our pre-civilization history. One of them being the Neolithic or agricultural revolution, the other being the urban revolution. So she believes that the reason we had this huge difference is because we experimented with female-dominated societies, and that it just wasn't an environment that was that worked with a family structure, with a highly civilized structure, and it was just not conducive to the environment that a true civilization needed to have. So this, as we have just discussed, female genital manipulation is something that happens in a lot of other cultures, and this has to do with clitorectomies or the sewing of the vagina, many different ways where women are being inhibited from experiencing sexual pleasure. And this is another way that in certain societies men have tried to control women, especially in ways that would keep them from straying and that would keep them from knowing the true power of their sexual capabilities. Now, whether or not this is actually truly biologically necessary or for civilization necessary, we don't know. It's still being looked into, but it's an interesting theory, and this kind of stuff that happens is absolutely horrible. And it's something that we're very lucky, even though we live in a male-dominated society, that it's not like this. On the absolute contrary, this was also something I found extremely interesting. There's a place called Mangaia. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Mangaia, but it's in the Cook Islands off the coast of Polynesia. And in this place, it is completely the opposite from every place in the world. And men, when they, it's almost like their bar mitzvah, when they become a man, the way they have to do it is to learn how to sexually satisfy a woman. So they actually go through a period of time where they work with a woman who's experienced in sex, who will teach them what to do. They have to be watched by somebody, kind of like the rabbi will teach you and watch you, learning. They actually have to be watched by someone, and they have to be approved until they can actually become a man. And if they're having sex with a virgin, they have to continuously do it until the woman has an orgasm. It's unbelievable how opposite some of these societies are. And unfortunately, our society isn't quite like this, but we have made a lot of movements towards fixing that double standard. And nowadays, it's not so taboo to talk about sex. We talk about it all the time. As a matter of fact, Cosmopolitan teaches us the 10 different ways that you can have an orgasm.